in. Does everybody online, do you have the materials that I sent?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Frank, do you have them too?
I will switch over to have them. I have to absent myself from this.
Hi, Nancy. Nancy and Phil, do you both have the materials?
Yes.
Okay, good.
I've got the materials, Rabbi.
Okay, perfect, wonderful. So this week we're going to begin to study really one of the really interesting and fascinating of these early rabbis who are the founding fathers of Judaism, of Rabbinic Judaism. And these are some of the stories that I felt most impacted by when I was studying to be a rabbi. And I'll be curious to see how you all also respond to them. But we're going to be studying one character whose name is Rabban Gamliel II. As you can tell from his name, he came from a great lineage. His grandfather was he was the head of the Sanhedrin, right? The Sanhedrin were the group of rabbis who together made all the laws and who heard cases of the people coming to them in the early days, right? The end of the Second Temple and going in, and they're the ones who really saved Judaism after the temple was destroyed. And so Rabban Gamliel's grandfather, Rabban Gamliel I, was the head of the Sanhedrin at the time when Jesus was alive. And he appears throughout the Gospels and he himself was the grandson of Hillel. So here he's the great Rabban Gamliel II is the great grandson of Hillel. And his grandfather, Rabban Gamliel, he was in the mode of Hillel, right? He was more lenient. He was a kind of a person who tried to be understanding, and he tried to not push the early Christians away. He was trying to be somewhat of a kind of peacemaker. Rabban Gamliel's grandfather, the first, as he appears in the Gospels.
Rabbi?
Yeah, go ahead.
It almost sounds as though even though he was part of the temple Judaism, but he sounds a lot like Rabbinic Judaism on his own. The way he lived his life was like as a rabbi, not as a priest.
Mm-hmm. And he was a rabbi, and even though you're right, he lived at the end of the Second Temple time, so he had a connection to the temple, but he embodied what we consider to be a rabbi. Exactly. I think it's really, really good a kind of a view of it. And at the same time, we have to think about it. The Romans at this period were very much oppressing all Jews. And both Rabban Gamliel I and Rabban Gamliel II, they saw it as like, how can we unite the Jewish people and against, even though the Romans, in the face of the Roman oppression against us. And the other thing that they both tried to do, and Rabban Gamliel II was even more able to do this than his grandfather, is that we have this tradition that the schools of Hillel and Shammai were very much warring against each other. The Hillel was a lenient one, the more easygoing one, and Shammai, they were the more strict ones, right? We have that famous story of the guy who comes to Hillel and Shammai and asks them, can you give me all of Judaism on one leg, one foot? And Shammai took his ruler and started beating the guy. And Hillel said, do not do unto others what you don't want to be done to yourself. The rest is commentary, go learn it. So the schools of Hillel and Shammai used to come to blows against each other. They used to even kill each other, according to early tradition.
Rabbi?
Yeah, go ahead.
Another insight. It sounds to me like when Rabbinic Judaism started, Rabbi Shammai was keeping kind of connected with the way the priesthood operated, and Rabbi Hillel really created modern, compassionate, emotional Judaism.
I think it's right. Shammai was more about the letter of the law. In some ways, he was more like the Sadducees, but Shammai was also a lot more, about being strict. But as you were saying, the compassionate, kind of open-minded Judaism was really needed at a time when you have great external pressure and internal pressure. And once the temple is destroyed, you're just trying to survive, right? You're just in survival mode. And so Rabban Gamliel II, who we're studying, he was embodied this great lineage, and he was a Nasi, he was a prince, he might have been the first to take on that title, but it was the head of the Sanhedrin that had that title. And the one who preceded him just before the head of Sanhedrin was Yochanan ben Zakkai, and we'll study him at some point. I'm trying to jump around and not make it too historical, too linear. But Yochanan ben Zakkai, he was the one who lived when the temple was destroyed. And the great story about Yochanan ben Zakkai is that when the siege of Jerusalem was happening, the Romans, according to Midrash at least, turned to the Jews in Jerusalem and said, look, we will give you religious autonomy. All you have to do is allow us to come in and take Jerusalem and give us, allow us to be your overmasters. And the zealots in Jerusalem said, we will never give in to you, the Romans. And Yochanan ben Zakkai, he tried to convince them to do it, but they refused. And so, as the story of the Midrash goes, Yochanan ben Zakkai smuggled himself out of Jerusalem in a coffin, and he left Jerusalem in a coffin, and he went to see the Roman who was the head of the siege, and he said to him, just allow me to go and take the sages out of Jerusalem and create a new center of rabbinic power in Yavne. And then he said to the Roman who's doing it, and you're going to be emperor one day. And he says, how do you know I'm going to be emperor? And he says, because we have a tradition that Jerusalem and the temple will only be destroyed by an emperor. And 3 days later, he got a letter saying, you are the new emperor of Rome. But he gave, who knows if that part is true, but he gave Yochanan ben Zakkai the ability and the religious autonomy to rebuild Rabbinic Judaism in a small town called Yavne, outside of Jerusalem, which Yochanan ben Zakkai did. And Yochanan ben Zakkai was the first leader after the destruction who started to try to adapt Judaism to not having a temple anymore. What do you do with completely different set of rules? And so after Yochanan ben Zakkai passed away, and so Rabban Gamliel II then became the head, and his father, right, his grandfather was the head of the Sanhedrin, but his father was kind of a zealot. His father was against the Romans. So one of the things that Yochanan ben Zakkai did is he asked the Romans to pardon Rabban Gamliel's father, and they did pardon him, and they had then allowed Rabban Gamliel II to become the head of the rabbinate. And so we're going to read about Rabban Gamliel II, and so this is kind of the world that he's coming into. He has lineage. He's also a legal authority. He's rich, and we're going to be reading about some of the stories about he tried to continue this period of consolidation and as one of the founding fathers of Rabbinic Judaism, work with all the other personalities, because I had a lot of personalities, as Jews have always been. 3 Jews, a million opinions, and there's always the shul. You go, you have 2 Jews on an island, but you have 2 Jews, you need 3 synagogues, right? The shul that they each go to, and then the shul they each don't go to. So that's kind of what it was like back then too. But they're trying to build Judaism out of this period with all the external pressure of the Romans, with all the sadness and mourning of the temple being destroyed, with all of these things happening. A really fascinating period. So that's the background out of which Rabban Gamliel emerges, trying to assert his authority as the head of the Sanhedrin, and trying to carry Judaism forward without the authority of the temple, and with a lot of different groups all vying, also with the Shammai and Hillel also between themselves, still warring between themselves. And he's trying to create a sense of we're going together as a people ahead of us. And the last piece I wanted to bring before we start to read is a sense of where they were spiritually. And they're in mourning. The temple's been destroyed. And their big question is does God still even love us? You know, they believe God lived in the temple, but if there's no more temple, does God still love the Jewish people? And where is their authority to even be able to do all the things they're trying to do when there's no temple and no prophecy and all that? So I'm going to just close it. Thank you, Dan, for closing the door. We're going to turn to page 216. And I want us to, as we're studying these founding fathers, really also get into who they were as people, because it really brings it all to life. Okay. Al, would you mind reading number 69, the first of the sources? And as you'll see, Rabban Gamliel II, he's born in the year 90, so he's born 20 years after the destruction of the temple.
Okay. A vignette about Rabbi Gamliel. When he got married, he recited the Shema on his wedding night. His disciples said to him, "Our master, did you not teach us that a bridegroom is exempt from the recital of the Shema?" He replied, "I will not listen to the suggestion that I should cast off the kingship of heaven from myself, even for a moment." Years later, Rabbi Gamliel bathed on the first night after his wife's death. His disciples said to him, "Our master, did you not teach us that a mourner is forbidden to bathe?" He replied, "I, being very delicate, am not like other people."
So a personality, you can always see it from he's a personality, and he's issuing halakhic rulings, but not abiding by his own halakhic rulings, which shows us, first of all, that there was a little bit more jiggle room back then with Jewish law. And these are two laws that still apply to this day, right? So one is that when you're just married, you don't have to think about all your halakhic obligations. You should be thinking about your newlywed, you know. And the other is when you're passed away and you're in mourning, you need to watch after yourself. But he doesn't even abide by his own rulings. So it tells you kind of the part of what kind of person he was.
Well, he considers himself a rank above the rabbis. Don't they consider Rabban a rank above the rabbis? So
he does, yeah. You can even say it. He's not a rabbi; he's a rabban, right? He gives himself the authority to be unique. Yeah.
Is that privilege of being Nasi, or is that just his personality?
A little bit of both, you know. You would think he would lead by example, but he's a big character, you know. So he's one of the founding fathers of Rabbinic Judaism. So he feels himself he can do whatever he wants a little bit, but he also inserted into the system a little bit of leeway, you know. If you're delicate, I guess you can live a little bit differently than other people.
What does he mean by the kingship of heaven?
So he was saying, you know, the Shema, when you say the Shema, you take the kingship of heaven upon yourself, right? That's why you say the Shema. And you have to do it twice a day. But he ruled, okay, if you're a bridegroom, you know, you don't have to think about taking the kingship of heaven upon yourself. But he's like, I want to do it anyway. So he's a little bit like a maverick, right? He wants to, but there is an element of spiritual independence here too, which is appealing, right? He's independent in his spiritual life, where he's saying that that's a value.
The other thing he's saying that we have the law, but the law has to be tempered with with what's happening with the individual Jew.
Yeah.
May I ask a question about the about this source?
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm so glad you showed these are some great stories that I wondered if I'd ever get to hear anybody discuss them. But if I think is the phrase the kingship that David asked about, is that the Ol Malchut Shamayim? Is that what that is? So people know that probably, or may from the morning service, because we like on Shabbat we sing it, the Ol Malchut Shamayim Zeh Mizeh, that the yoke of the kingdom. Is that the phrase that he's talking about here, or is it something else?
It is, but it's very specifically connected to the Shema. That when you say the Shema, you're supposed to take on upon yourself the Ol Malchut Shamayim, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. You're supposed to think, God is my God, right? What does that even mean? The yoke of the kingdom of heaven is you say, God is my God. When you say this prayer, you're supposed to say, God is my God. And so that's a very early rabbinic and a rabbinic ruling that when you say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is my God, the Lord is one. I shall love the Lord my God. Shall love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all my might." Then you're saying that when you're saying that, it is taking upon yourself the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, and you say it twice a day because you have to keep reminding yourself. But he issued this ruling: hey, you don't need to when you're a bridegroom, but he did it anyway on his wedding night.
Well, then maybe I ask further, because this was my question. Sure. You hit directly on it. It says in the footnotes, "Be barachot." I guess that means it comes from the Babylonian Talmud, that tractate. That's where we get the story, or is it an earlier story that they repeat there? And the reason I ask is that so many centuries later, that I don't know that we know how much it relates to the historical man, but it's clearly they want to preserve that story with all its disturbing side and its charming side and everything, and so that's why I'm asking whether it was an earlier story. It
might appear in the Mishnah. It might appear in the Mishnah too.
Oh, it might. Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. I didn't say.
And if not, it's a baraita. It's considered baraita. It's considered an early teaching, and it might have been modified a little bit. But if you're playing the game of the Talmud, then you would say it has not been modified. It is a trustworthy story.
It's interesting that, Rabbi, you said, he's helped create the set of rules, laws, whatever you want to call them. But he sometimes plays fast and loose.
Yes.
But in one case, he's being more strict.
Yeah.
And in the other case, he's being less strict.
Yep.
So it's not even that he's saying to his disciples, well, yeah, we've got the laws, but you should always be more strict. Or you should be a little less strict. It's like a mixed message. Mm-hmm. And then I'm wondering if his disciples kind of sat there sometimes and were flummoxed by the message that they were getting of, well, what do we do? Do we lean more strict or less strict?
Well, it's one of the reasons that I recently connected this to the conservative movement is, and I think in the conservative movement, we've definitely connected some of these ideas of religious autonomy, halachic autonomy a little bit, which don't, in the Orthodox world, have been really lost. The Orthodox rabbis in our days almost always lean towards the more strict, right? I remember one of my family friends she grew up ultra Orthodox, and her grandfather was a very very well known early rabbi. He used to wear 50 pairs of tzitzit every day.
Why?
As a sign of how pious, it's the garment with the four fringes, and so of course she used to always joke, this family friend, that who was the real pious person was his wife, who had to wash the 50 pairs of the tzitzit, right? But this is where the Orthodox world has gone, which is getting more and more strict. And in these early stories, you feel there was more a sense of, sometimes strict, sometimes lenient, a lot more a sense of each person decides a little bit more which way to go, which I think is the conservative approach, which is, we've been given the law, but we have, each person has some sense of how do we apply the law. Maybe I'll tell the joke, well, it's a bad joke, but there's a joke of the God comes and wants to give the Torah to all the different streams of Judaism. And this is a joke that's offensive to everybody, so I apologize in advance. But God brings the law first to the Reform movement and says, here's the law, do you want it or not? And the Reform movement, well, what's in it? And they say, well, you shall keep Shabbat. And they say, no, we don't want it. And then he takes the law to the Litvak Jews who live in Lakewood, and he says, here is a law, here's a Torah, would you like it? They say, well, what's in it? And it says, 6 days you shall work. And they say, no, we don't want it. Then he takes the law, then he takes the Torah to Chabad, and he says, well, do you want the law? And they say, well, what's in it? And he says, you shall have no other God but me. And they say, no, we don't want it. Because of their emphasis on the Rebbe. And then they go to the conservative movement, and they say, well, God says, do you want the law? And they say, well, what's in it? And he says all the laws, and they say, yes, no, yes. So that's kind of the conservative view of halakha. So the early rabbis had a lot of that struggling, and I think that's why the conservative movement feels very attached to these early rabbis, to yes, no. So let's go to source 71, unless anybody else had any other comments they wanted to make on the. Okay, Alex, so we're good. This is just a little introduction to a great story we're going to read. Go ahead, Alan, please.
Okay, 71. Rabbi Gamliel used to have a diagram of the phases of the moon on a tablet hung on the wall of his upper chamber, and he used to show it to the unlearned and say, did the new moon look like this or like that?
So in the early days of Rabbinic Judaism, how did you know when it was a holiday? You would wait, when the moon completely disappeared and it was the new moon, then you would wait until either you would announce the moon is completely gone and someone would say it, or you would see the very first speck of the moon come, and then you would retroactively declare which day was Rosh Chodesh, right? Rosh Chodesh is on the new moon, right? The new moon, but then that changes everything, because it's like that decides when the holiday is, right? Because you have a holiday on the 15th day on the month, for example. So basically, the month there was no set calendar, but it was based on seeing the moon. And it's kind of like the way Ramadan, right, among the Muslims is you see the moon and declare it's Ramadan or not Ramadan. So that's the way Rabbinic Judaism used to work too. You would have to have witnesses who would come and say how they saw the moon. So Rabban Gamliel would train all these people into seeing what are the different phases of the moon, and when you declare it, you would have different witnesses, and it created a lot of uncertainty and trouble. But we're going to. So let's go now to page 73. To story 73 on page 217, and we're going to have Alan please read for us number 73 too.
Okay. On one occasion, 2 witnesses came and said, we saw the new moon in the morning in the east and in the evening in the west. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri said curtly, they are false witnesses. However, when they came to Yavne, Rabbi Gamliel accepted their testimony.
So please read the 2 notes down below. In rabbinical school, we spend hours making sure to map all this all out. I don't want to spend that time doing the exact new moon but please read
Okay,
number 2 and 3, yeah.
note 3. We should naturally suppose this to mean that they saw the old moon in the morning and the new moon in the evening. And number 4, presumably because according to what has been stated above, the old moon is never visible for 24 hours before the new appears.
Okay, go ahead, read on another occasion.
On another occasion, 2 witnesses came and said, we saw the new moon at its proper time, but on the night that should have been new moon, it was not visible. However, by that time, Rabbi Gamliel had already accepted their testimony and declared the 30th day as new moon. Rav Dosa ben Harkina said, they are false witnesses. How can it be testified that a woman has given birth if on the next day her belly is still swollen?
I.e., they hadn't seen the new moon yet when they they hadn't seen the new moon going into its new phase when really there was no moon. Okay, go ahead.
Rav Joshua said to him, I agree with what you say. Then Rabbi Gamliel sent word to Rav Joshua, I order you to come to me with your staff and your money on the day that according to your reckoning should be Yom Kippur.
So what's happening here, right, is according to Rabban Gamliel, who accepted this testimony, which is very dubious testimony, let's say Thursday was going to be Yom Kippur, but really, as it turned out, they were false witnesses, and Friday was Yom Kippur. Or Wednesday was Yom Kippur. I can't wrap my head totally around that at this very moment. But everybody thought Rabban Gamliel gave a poor judging, but Rabban Gamliel said, no, this is what it is. And then Rabbi Joshua, he's commanding Rabbi Joshua to come on the day with his money. You can't carry money on Yom Kippur, that's a horrible sin. To come on the day that he knows is the real Yom Kippur, he's commanding him to come with the money in his hand. So he's asking Rabbi Joshua to break a law of Yom Kippur, a holiest day, just to show that he, Rabban Gamliel, is right. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's continue.
Okay.
When Rabbi Akiva,
Let's see, where am I? Another.
right after the, when Rabbi Akiva went to Rabbi Joshua,
When Rabbi, when Rabbi Akiva went to Rabbi Joshua and found him distraught, he asked, Master, why are you so distraught? Rabbi Joshua replied, Akiva, that man, Gamliel, deserves to be laid up in a sick bed for 12 months without the opportunity to issue such an order. Rabbi Akiva, I can bring proof from scripture that whatever Rabban Gamliel has done is valid, because it says, these are the appointed seasons of the Lord, holy convocations which ye shall proclaim in their appointed seasons. Meaning that God says, whether they are proclaimed at their proper time or not at their proper time, I have no appointed sessions other than these. Rabbi Joshua then went to Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas, who said to him, if we call in question the decisions of the court of Rabban Gamliel, we may very well question the decisions of each and every court that has arisen since the days of Moses up to now. For scripture says, then went up Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. Why are the names of the elders not expressly mentioned, if not to teach that every 3 judges who have risen up as a court over Israel are to be deemed like the court of Moses? Hearing that, Rabbi Joshua took his staff and his money and went to Yavna to Rabbi Gamliel on the day on which, according to his own reckoning, Kippur fell. As soon as Rabbi Gamliel saw him, he rose up from his chair kissed Rabbi Joshua on his head and said to him, "Come in peace, my master and my disciple, my master in wisdom and my disciple, because you adopted my decision. Blessed is the generation in which men of great distinction obey those of little distinction." So basically, make decisions to keep the peace.
Exactly. Yeah, he made a decision to keep the peace, even though he was kind of humiliated during it. Nancy, you look perplexed.
I'm very, very confused about what's going on. Okay, first of all, isn't the new moon no moon at all?
Uh-huh.
So you cannot see a new moon. What you see is the absence of the appearance of the reflection of the moon in the sky, right? So I'm
But in this case, yeah, I basically like I said, when I was in rabbinical school, we spent the whole time trying to work it out, and I don't. It takes mental power to work through all of what it exactly is, and we could do it, but basically, the essence of it is that when they falsely you see the two moon. I think basically there would have been 2 days where you don't see the new moon. So where you don't see any moon. So if they testify that there was no moon on the first day, when really there still was a little bit of a moon, then you would think the next day would be the full new moon, and then you would already decree that the day after that would be the day when the moon starts to come back again.
okay.
And so they were false witnesses. They said that there was no moon, and really there was still a tiny bit of a little moon still there. I think it's that.
Okay.
So he accepted that testimony and already declared that next day was, or that day was the end of a previous month, and the next day was the new moon of Tishrei, right? The moon that of the month of Rosh Hashanah, and already declared, okay, today is Rosh Hashanah, and in 10 days is Yom Kippur. While the next day they were waiting it for all to also be. They were waiting for the next day for the new sliver of moon to appear, but on that day also there was no moon, so they know that really it was the Yom Kippur should have been the day after that. They were off by one day.
Okay.
So
Rabbi, what I hear that's really powerful to me is what you said. Blessed is a generation of men of great distinction who listen to those of lesser distinction. This is a radical thought. Up until this point in time, the kings always told the common people the way it was. And it continued in most of the world until the 19th and 20th centuries. But here it's saying, there is wisdom both at the high end of Judaism, and there's wisdom at those of us who aren't so high. That we need to talk to each other because we both can share wisdom and we can be better with it.
And as well, there's a wisdom in the rule of the majority, right? Which was, or in accepting they're trying to struggle to just everybody try and live the same Judaism. And if you're always contesting and saying, as the ruler, they're contesting what Rabban Gamliel says, and then they're saying everybody's going to do what is good for him, and we're just going to be a big mess. And so you have to eat your pride and eat up your arrogance a little bit, even knowing that you were right, and just accept what Rabban Gamliel said.
Well,
Rabban Gamliel knew that what he was doing was maybe not so nice, and he's really humiliating Rabbi Yeshua, because he's asking him publicly to come and accept his authority, right? He's asking him to bring his money, he's asking him to bring his staff and accept him. He's asking him to eat his pride, his rabbinic pride, which is very hard for, and to come and just accept his authority. And Rabbi Joshua did it, right, out of a sense of duty to a friendship, really.
It seems to me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That I mean, it's about rabbinic authority, is it not? Finally,
Yes.
and then the question becomes, as among the rabbis or the rabbanim or whatever, it becomes a question of who has that authority, because it's not about the generality. They don't have the authority. They don't have the basis for such authority. So it says in one of the earlier paragraphs, I guess I could pull it up. He says he announced this. Once he announced it, that was the way it was, and they go by that. And so we have that interesting use of the scriptural citations to say, what are my appointed times, my moadim? They're whatever you appoint. So that again is the rabbinical authority. And then when he comes to Rabbi Joshua, that's so poignant because he has, as you say, he has humiliated him, and then he wants to say and I think he probably sincerely means that, you are a man of greater distinction, but I have the authority, and so it has to go by what I say, and you've accepted that. And I have it because of my position, not because I have a charismatic quality like Moses maybe.
Right. It's it's requiring humility from Rabbi Joshua, and Rabban Gamliel is trying to institute a system, and it's kind of like, it's not the plan A, right? The plan A is you have God tell you, this is when it's supposed to be, right? God speaks to a prophet and Moses tells you, this is when it is. That's plan A, right? Plan B is God appears to the elders, and then the elders say, we know exactly when it is. Plan C is that, the person, in charge also has the wisdom to know and to never make a mistake. But now we're at plan D, which is, okay, we just gotta work with the authority of whoever is the head of it, because if not, it's going to be chaos. And so there's also this beautiful, poignant moment of okay, we're just working with what we have. And the rabbis are, right, we go to see Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva, he has to ask these other rabbis, what do I do? He's being so nasty to me, Rabban Gamliel, making me do this. And they're saying, well, you need to do it, because this is the way it's got to be. And if we don't do this, then our authority is going to be meaningless, and our whole system is going to lose its ability to work for us. But it's also about rabbinic friendship, which one of the reasons I enjoy it too, right? You get a feeling for, Rabban Gamliel is nice in the end, right? He kisses him on the head and says, thank you for doing this for me, right? He says, I know what I asked you is horrible, but thank you for doing this for me. And you're wiser than I am, right? He accepts that he was wiser than he is.
But Rabbi Akiva has to intercede to convince Rabbi Yeshua that he has to comply with this order, whether he agrees with it or not. He has to comply, and it's that intervention, I think, of Rabbi, because I don't think he would have done it until Rabbi Akiva intervened and told him to do it.
He might not have. He might not have, because
did he not go for another opinion to Rabbi Adosa ben Harkinas? Is that right?
Uh-huh.
So and he gave, instead of a scriptural reference, he gave or authority. He gave a kind of a sociological statement of what's going on here, and how you have to go along with it. And he did go along with it. There's many other angles. I mean, it's very rich, and the fact that they preserved it in this way is so fascinating, that because you see such different sides of Rabban Gamliel.
I keep thinking about this story in light of what we read earlier about one example of Rabbi Gamliel being more strict and then less strict. And it seems like this story, it's if Rabbi Gamliel had said, oh, you're right, I'm wrong, Yom Kippur falls on a different day kind of would have set society into chaos. Because some people might have started celebrating, some people might have said, oh, now I have to celebrate 2 days. And this way, it's not like somebody said, oh, was this a pig or not a pig? and you made the wrong decision. It seems like that would have much more consequence, more far-reaching consequences. Whereas this one is, okay, maybe, you know, and I don't want to make light of not celebrating Yom Kippur on Yom Kippur, but it's that, you know, that in this case, okay, we missed this one day, next year we'll have to be, or on future holidays, we're going to have to be much more careful, much more conscious of the witnesses that we listen to, so that this doesn't happen again.
It's funny you should mention the pig, because this story appears in the Mishnah itself fully, and part of it is, as we were saying, is that it builds this idea of rabbinic authority, which brings certainty instead of chaos, which is once the rabbis make a decision, the truth doesn't even matter anymore. So a few years ago, there was this really interesting story in Los Angeles, where even when I was living there, before I came here, there was this one kosher butcher that was known to have like the best kosher meat in town. And it was always as well supplied, and it had it had stuff that was both pasture fed and kosher, and it tasted amazing, and the prices were good, and none of the other, the competition couldn't figure out where were they getting their meat from, but everybody went to them. It was called Doheny Kosher Market. We're talking about like a major Jewish community with thousands of observant Jews, and going to them and supplying all kinds of things. And then one day somebody filmed them that they had one of their meat trucks was in a kind of like parking lot next to McDonald's, and there was another park that pulled up, and it transferred meat from that truck kind of unseen into the other truck. And suddenly they were taking meat into there. They were taking the meat, that meat, and taking it, and suddenly people were like up in arms. And so they started to say, so what was their response? Their response was, well, it's not that we were taking unkosher meat, right? But that they said, we publicize ourselves as being glatt kosher, and we were taking a slightly lesser degree of kosher meat, which we sell to our conservative clients, and their synagogues, which some of the local conservative rabbis said, yes, it's true. But this happened a week before Passover, when everybody already bought all their Passover meat. And so nobody knew what to do. And some rabbis were coming up and trying to defend them and saying, no, we've observed them. We know their meat really is kosher. And others were saying, we don't know what to do. So the whole neighborhood was like, what do we do? Right? Everybody already bought their meat for the seders, and it was like a big crisis. So what happened is that all the rabbis of the area got together and they made a ruling. And the ruling is, this meat is kosher. You can eat it for your Passover seders. And so at that moment, it didn't matter if the meat was kosher or not kosher. The meat was considered kosher. I don't know how many people actually kept it, but the meat was considered kosher.
What happened to the butcher shop? What happened to the butcher shop after that?
It closed.
Guys are Ghana.
It came out in the end, that their meat was not kosher.
Yeah.
It was all completely non-kosher, and they were just fooling everybody. And the reason they were able to get such a good supply of meat and it was so cheap, blah, 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 was because it was just totally not kosher, right? So it was all a farce. And then and that happens every now and then. I remember when I was very young, but growing up in Jerusalem, in the old city, my parents told me the story of there was an Italian restaurant that was serving food, and they had the most amazing fake Parmesan cheese that everybody around the whole country. Well, guess what?
Fake.
It was not fake Parmesan cheese. It was real
The
Parmesan
MS.
cheese that they were. So anyway, but that other story is telling you that the way rabbinic authority is structured is that based on stories like this is that they say we have the authority, and we're saying that day is Yom Kippur, so it's Yom Kippur. That is kosher meat, so it's kosher meat. And like in the old country, I think Rabbi Zalman, who was ended up being a renewal rabbi, but he used to say, there always was some leeway in what's kosher or not. So, if in the old country, he used to say that I think it was to his father, or I don't know if that's what the example, or if he was just saying in general, but it used to be, this was, I think, in Austria or Germany, if someone used to come to the rabbi and say, is this chicken kosher? If it was a poor person, he would look at it and he would look, and even if it was not totally kosher, he'd say your chicken's kosher, just eat it. And if it was a wealthy person, he would be a little bit more, because he knew he could afford to lose that chicken. So there was a sense that there was more leeway, but there was rabbinic authority to do this. And the rabbis, it was important for them to have this rabbinic authority for many reasons. But one of them was because, it says in the Torah, you shall observe Shabbat and do no work on Shabbat. But it doesn't tell you what that even means, right? You shall do. So basically the rabbis then came and said, well, there are 39 categories of, what are the things you shall not do on Shabbat? But hey, why should you listen to the rabbis? Why should you listen to the rabbis at all? They're at this point, they're in basically the founding fathers of Judaism are inventing a whole religion to some degree, which they're not inventing it, but they're deducing it. So they say, okay, what are the 39 categories of work? Well, these are the 39 things that were used to make the tabernacle. So it was tanning meats to make the hides. It was baking the bread to make the bread that was in there. It was doing these. And that ended up being the categories of work you shall not do on Shabbat. And all these different things that they were creating a whole other way of doing. And so if they didn't respect their own authority, why should other people respect their authority based on what the whole system they were living? And so the rabbinic authority was a really important part of everything that was happening there. And the founding fathers were wrestling with each other, and trying to also decide how do we establish this. And a lot of it was based on previous customs, but they were all turning it into hard law, and they were all turning it into, ways of acting. And so, even to this day, we have this concept, which is really important, especially in the conservative movement, of that the rabbi of every congregation is the Mara Datra, is the head of that place. So, every community is basically autonomous. So me as a rabbi of this congregation, I can decide 99% of the law that happens in this building without the conservative movement telling me you should do this or you should do that, because there's this concept we have from stories like this of rabbinic authority because we have so many laws and we have so many customs, and there's also so much leeway in how every community lives Jewish, right? In our congregation, right, we sit at certain moments and we stand at certain moments, which is different than most other congregations. And we do that because that's just our custom, and we try and give breadth and wiggle room to customs and to all of it. But at the same time, there has to be some authority or it becomes too chaotic. But if it's too centrally authoritative, then there's no room for people to live their lives. And so we're all living in this interesting wiggle room of all of it.
Well, the interesting thing about the moon, by the way, is you would think that was strictly empirical, okay? That did not have to do with a subjective judgment, that this was out there, objective, and etc. But it isn't. Somehow, all of this stuff has some degree of subjectivity to it. And if you focus on the subjectivity part of it, I think you get conservative Judaism out of that. If you pretend that these things are actually in nature completely objective, or that they're in the Torah completely objective, then you get the sort of the adherence to the written letter of the law, or to something that counts as some kind of an empirical finding. So this is sort of interesting. This seems to me that these passages have to do with a slight separation from that, as the rabbi was saying. There's an opening here for the subjective judgment of human beings in the whole game of being. And that's the world that we're living in right now.
Which is a world of intellectual honesty, but also, you know, trying to grapple with what does God want from us, right? That's the big question. What does God want from us? God wants us to live a life of meaning and purpose and of spirit, of trying to follow the Torah as best we can. But it's got to be livable. And we've got to be honest about who we are. On the other hand, there's also this very spiritual concept of that we have to believe that all of the leaders of Judaism, going all the way back to Moses and the empowerment of the first kind of leaders, that they were divinely inspired on some level, right? And that their divine inspiration is more important than what we think is a kind of logical wisdom of where it should be or not be. Because according to logic, Yom Kippur is tomorrow, not today. But we've got to somehow believe that the leaders also have some divine inspiration that's guiding them, even though they're human beings. That means that the Judaism that we're living is the way God wants us to live it. It's a very interesting kind of like balancing of those two ideas. And maybe where I will end, at least my view of all of this, is that part of what I find so moving in this story is actually the very end. And that's when the two rabbis kind of come back and he kisses them on the head, right? And says, "You're my master and my disciple." And it's kind of like, well, we're all trying to work through all of this, all of us, not just rabbis, but every Jew is trying to work out, you know, how do I stand with the tradition? What do I want to do with it? And we're working with feelings of what's right and what's not right. We're working with feelings of guilt, you know, what other people did. We're working with what the way it is and the way we're trying to live it. But through all of it, there should be a certain sense of, you know, of love of each other, of compassion for each other, of knowing we're all just doing our best, and, you know, of embracing each other through living in the struggle as they are, and then feeling a sense of self-compassion, and that we're within that there's something beautiful and peaceful and spiritual and inspiring to be found. And next week, we're going to come to an even more fraught and rich story of Rabban Gamliel and the doings of him and the other rabbis, founding fathers. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you all.
Have
See
a
you
good
next
day.
week.
I'm gonna miss next.